Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about chapter 13, which is quasi-experiments and small n designs. And then we are going to just kind of wrap up the class. So what is a quasi-experimental design? A quasi-experiment is kind of what it sounds like, quasi-experiment, almost an experiment. You conduct a quasi-experiment when you can't do a true experiment because you cannot manipulate the independent variable. And that's the key here. You can't manipulate the independent variable. So what type of independent variables can't be manipulated? Well, let's think about it. If you want to compare memory scores as the dependent variable, comparing children who have a diagnosis of autism and children diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So the independent variable would be type of disorder, and you cannot manipulate that, right? People come with either a diagnosis of one or the other. Or if you want to compare depression scores as the dependent variable on adults who are married versus adults who are divorced. So the independent variable would be marital status, and we have divorced or married. And again, we can't manipulate that. We can't have people come into a study, volunteer to be part of a study, and then randomly assign them to groups and say, oh, you all in this group, you're the married group, you're all getting married, and this group, you're all in the divorced group, you're all getting divorced. Again, we can't manipulate that. Any research on gender differences, males compared to females, we can't manipulate that. So there are lots and lots of studies that are quasi-experiments because we cannot manipulate the independent variable. There we go. So the quasi-experiments are very much like experiments. The researcher picks an independent variable and a dependent variable, but the researcher cannot randomly assign participants to groups. Instead, you're using what we call naturally occurring groups. So you can still randomly select from the population. So again, if I was looking at depression scores on people who are married compared to people who are divorced, I still could have random selection from the community of people who are married and randomly select 50 married people and randomly select 50 divorced people. So I can still do random selection to get them into my research study, but I can't randomly assign them one group or the other. They come in these naturally occurring groups. So when you have a quasi-experimental design, you need an experimental group and then what we call a comparison group. We don't call it a control group, but a comparison group. And pretty much, like all of my research is quasi-experimental, where I look at children who have had strokes early in life, compared to children who are typically developing, or children who have a metabolic disorder called cystinosis compared to children who don't have the metabolic disorder cystinosis. I don't assign them to these groups, they're naturally occurring groups. And since participants have not been randomly assigned to groups, we can't assume the groups are equivalent. So, for example, here's a study on the quasi-experimental study on the effects of cosmetic surgery, and you can see here that the researchers are doing this study. Among the major reasons for undergoing elective plastic surgery is to enhance self-esteem and increase self-image and increase self-esteem. So they compared the self-esteem of people who underwent cosmetic surgery and people who only considered it. Now again, random assignment was impossible. You can't have a group of people and randomly assign some to get plastic surgery and some not to get plastic surgery. So they had to use a quasi-experimental design where they compared people who underwent cosmetic surgery to the comparison group of people who registered at the same plastic surgery office. So they were probably interested, but then elected not to have the surgery. So they signed up, maybe they had a consultation, I don't know, but then they didn't do the surgery. So that was the surgery versus the comparison group. And they collected data on these 3 different measures: self-esteem, life satisfaction, general attractiveness, self-rating. And they collected this at 4 different time points: baseline, 1 month later, 6 months later, 1 year later. And they did show that those who elected to have surgery reported higher levels of self-esteem afterwards. However, again, we did not manipulate the variable of who was in the surgery group and who was in the comparison group. And so, can we really say that cosmetic surgery caused a rise in self-esteem, right? The question is, are these 2 groups comparable to begin with? Is there anything systematically different about the people who chose to undergo surgery compared to the people who didn't choose the surgery? And could that be a confound? Could that be something that would explain our results? For instance, right, those who chose the surgery might have been most unhappy with their appearance. And so they were okay going through a surgical procedure to fix their appearance. And the ones who chose not to may have had less of a problem with their appearance. Um, and that might explain why having the surgery really improved self-esteem in the group who was really bothered by their um, physical appearance compared to the other group. And that's the issue with quasi-experiments. So what you're doing is you're looking for possible pre-existing differences between the groups. And could those pre-existing differences possibly explain your results? So when you have a non-equivalent control group, that's what we call, again, that we have the group that we're studying, and then a non-equivalent control group or comparison group. The groups are formed on naturally existing groups, intact groups. And so, for instance, in this case, if we had a group of participants who experienced a tornado in their city and a group of participants who did not experience a tornado, and then we measured stress, and we see that the people who lived through the tornado had higher levels of stress than the ones who didn't, can we conclude that going through a tornado increases stress? And the problem is we don't know if these groups were equal to begin with. That's the whole point of random assignment in a true experiment, is that we have one group of participants that come into our research study, and then we randomly assign them to one group or the other in the hopes of being sure that the 2 groups are equivalent, that we randomize any differences. But in this case, we can't do that. And so we don't know if the 2 groups were equal to begin with. So the big question in quasi-experiments is comparability. How do you come up with a comparison group? What's a reasonable comparison group for the group that you're studying? You would want to think about demographic characteristics that might be unique to the experimental group to find a non-equivalent control group that would be similar. So if we go back to this example, if we're interested in studying stress in people who have lived through a tornado in their city, what would be a good non-equivalent control group? Would a non-equivalent control group be a group of research method students in San Diego, California? Probably not, right? Because there are lots of differences between people who experience a tornado in their city and college students in San Diego, California, right? First of all, we don't really have tornadoes in San Diego, California. So you might want the participants in your non-equivalent to control group to be in a place that is similar, right? Somewhere in the middle of the country. Depending on this group, you'd want to look at socioeconomic factors, ethnicity factors, again, where they live, rural, urban, and make sure that the group that you find is similar in all of those characteristics to hopefully be able to say at the end of the study that yes, the participants were as close as possible in terms of similarity before the tornado, and then you can feel pretty good that if stress has increased, that it's probably due to the tornado as opposed to other factors. So you're trying to come up with a reasonable comparison group. You're also able to do a pretest to assure that your group, are similar before some kind of a treatment. A pretest is not always possible, though, right? Is it possible to do a pretest before a tornado? You wouldn't know who is going to live through a tornado or not, or some disease group that you're trying to study that children are born with. There's no pretest, or even a head injury. Very few people have pre-test MRIs or IQ scores, and then you're trying to look at the effects of, let's say, a head injury. So it's not always possible, although it's one way to do this. But if you are able to get a pretest, then you can definitely look at change scores and say, pretest to post-test, I see a difference in one group and not in the other group. Another thing we can do with quasi-experimental research is what we call matching. This is selecting your sample from one group and then finding a group of characteristics that you think are important and matching your other set of participants on those characteristics. So going back to the tornado study, if we have our group of people who have volunteered, who have lived through a tornado, and the first person in the study is, let's say, a 30-year-old male who makes $40,000 a year and lives in a rural town, um, and we can leave it at that, then you might want to look for and match a participant. So of your group of participants who maybe have volunteered for the study who have not gone through and experienced a tornado, you're also looking for a male who is 30, who makes the same relative income, who also lives in a rural area. And in that way, you're matching on some characteristics, and you can say, well, and then if the next person is a 50-year-old female who lives in a suburban part of town and is unemployed, then you're maybe going to look for someone who did not experience a tornado who is also a 50-year-old female in a suburban part of town who is not employed. And by doing that, you end up with two groups that are matched, that you can say, well, we've got the same gender proportions in each group, we have the same average income in each group, we have the same number of people living in rural or suburban or urban areas in each group, and we have perhaps the same ethnicities in each group. But you can't do that for everything, right? You have everything that could possibly affect stress. Not only are those things, you might want to look at marital status and do they own a house or are they renting, and are they employed, and what else? Is there stress in their family? Do they have family nearby? I mean, you could keep going and going. And there's no way to match on everything, but you could find a few characteristics that you can match your two groups and at least say, these key features, we've matched our two groups, and those can't be the reasons why our groups are, let's say, different on the stress measure. Quasi-experiments can see if results observed in the laboratory generalize to the real world. So there is sometimes you have to do a quasi-experiment, but sometimes you want to do a quasi-experiment because they're more real world. You know, I could create something in my laboratory that is some kind of scary situation and then have people take a stress test after. But that's lab created, and of course you've got people, they know they're in a laboratory, and is it really testing them the same way that undergoing a true traumatic natural disaster would affect them. So by doing something quasi-experimentally, you're actually seeing the real effects kind of in the real world. So that's important. And then, as I said, quasi-experiments can test theories that can't be tested experimentally. We can't test, the effects of divorce and not divorce on people's depression scores because we can't possibly manipulate that variable of marital status. Now on to small n designs. This is when you have n meaning number of participants. This is when you study only a few individuals. And we would do a small n design oftentimes if, number one, you're looking at a participant who has a very unique situation and you couldn't possibly find 50 or 100 people who are in the same situation or who have the same disease condition. I'm thinking of the study of Jeannie, who was a child who was found after being neglected for many years, and she was maybe 10 or 11 years old when she was found locked in the basement of her house and hadn't really been exposed to any language. And so there were lots of studies done on Jeannie to understand the critical period of language, and can you learn language if you haven't been exposed to language for about 10 years. Now that's a small n design, or we would call it a case study because it was a one person, because we couldn't possibly find 50 people or 100 people, and thank goodness we couldn't, who haven't been exposed to language until they were 10 years old. So when you have a unique situation, or if you're trying a brand new therapy and you don't want to try it on 100 people, but you want to try on just a few people first, that can sometimes be useful to do a small n design. Let's see. So participants in large n designs, participants are grouped, and the data is from individual participants. Are not of interest in and of themselves. You group everyone together and study them together. So when you do a research study, you just say, we had 50 participants, the average age was 23 years old, et cetera, et cetera. We don't talk about each participant individually, and instead we represent them as group averages. For a small n or a case study design, each participant is treated separately. And it's really interesting. If you haven't read a case study, and I know in all your free time, probably you aren't going to, but if you have a chance to read a case study, they read more like a story where they give you really in-depth, detailed information about the one or two or three people in the study. They go through their medical history, their educational history, their social history, and so you get this very rich qualitative data. And the data for each individual is presented separately. And we've learned a lot from case studies. We've learned a lot from patient HM about memory. This was the patient who had very severe seizures and had bilateral removal of his hippocampus on both the left and right sides, and unfortunately found out, the doctors found out that the hippocampus is very important for consolidating memory and for letting people create new memories, and he was left with a very severe anterior grade memory problem in the inability to form new memories. There was many studies done on him, and probably written about in almost every psychology textbook, just a single person, a case study. Also, that's how Piaget did a lot of his work on child development, by studying individual children and looking at their results. He didn't do a lot of group studies, it was more individual observations. One way you can, there are lots of ways to do case study research, and you could take a class to learn a lot more about that. But we want to try to make a case study or a small n study as scientific as possible, is to do, this is an example of what we call a time series design. In this case, we've got weeks here, we've got 3 individual children, and we have foreign language use. And our goal in this study was to increase English use in a multicultural classroom. And so in a time series design, you take a number of measurements over time in a series. How about that? So in this case, it's every week. Could be every week, it could be every day, depending on the study. And at first, there's no treatment, so they're just measuring how much foreign language use each child had. And you can see at week 1, in all 3 cases is pretty high. Week 2, all 3 cases are pretty high. And week 3, all 3 students use quite a bit of the foreign language in the classroom. And then this dotted line is representing the intervention, and the intervention is using praise to increase English. So every time the student uses English, they get praised by the teacher. And so this intervention for the first student happened here at, what are we at? Right after week 3. And as soon as the intervention was implemented, you can see at week 4, we already have a decrease in foreign language use. And over the next measurements, we have this continued decrease in foreign language use. But perhaps that was just by chance, that was a coincidence. Maybe there was some of those internal validity threats we talked about, a history effect, something that happened that changed the foreign language use. And it really wasn't the intervention. This is why we have another participant, and here you go. We have now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks without the intervention, and then the intervention is implemented, and then again you can see after the intervention very clearly a decrease in foreign language use. But again, this is letting us see that it's pretty consistently tied to the use of the intervention. And then we've got this other participant here who goes 9 weeks without the intervention, and then by week 10, after the intervention is in place, again, you see this decrease. And so when you have a time series design and you stagger when you put in the interventions, you can start to see, this really looks like an effect of in this case using praise, and not that, oh, they've been in class for 3 weeks, and so it's only natural that after 3 weeks in class, foreign language use decreases, because again, you can say, well, that didn't happen to participant 2 or participant 3, or there wasn't a history effect, or there wasn't a whole lot of other things that could explain this. This helps make our small N designs a little bit more scientific. So we made it to the end of research methods, and I just want to take a few minutes to put it all together and talk about maximizing validity with a multi-method and highly creative research designs. And the idea here is that there are trade-offs in research. Hopefully by now that's kind of a big take-home message, is there's no one perfect research study. There's no one perfect way to study a research question. And we could talk about this as some people call it the three-horned dilemma, that no study can address all 3 things. Precision, meaning internal validity, cause and effect, being a very precise cause and effect situation, generalizability to situations, and generalizability to people, and this is the idea of external validity. No study can do them all. And so we really have to use a multi-method approach where you use different methods to address the same research question. You might look at, I don't know, do cell phones impede people's ability to pay attention, let's say multitasking and using cell phones? Does it make them more dangerous as they are driving, or more dangerous as they are crossing the street? Well, you might do something like that in a experimental way in a laboratory to get very good internal validity. You might do some observational research, right, which is has more external validity. And so you're looking at the same question in multiple ways. Also, you may operationalize the independent and dependent variable in different ways. So what do we mean by multitasking? Well, different researchers are going to operationalize that in a number of ways. What do we mean by being able to pay attention? all of those terms will be operationalized differently by different researchers. And when we do that, when we use different methods, when we use different operational definitions, and we keep seeing similar results over many studies that are all done a little bit differently, then we start to have some real faith or belief that our results are real, right? If we just see something in one study, it doesn't give us a lot of conviction that that result is true. It could be true. It could be a type 1 error, type 2 error, sampling error. But when you keep seeing the same result multiple times in studies done multiple ways, then you start to think, okay, I think I found something here. And so just to keep in mind, a true lab experiment, which we talked about, which has to do with manipulating the independent variable, having a lot of experimental control, those types of studies are very good for precision and being able to say that the independent variable causes a change in the dependent variable, but are pretty weak when it comes to generalizability or external validity. There's not much real life because we don't really mimic real life. We're usually in a laboratory. We have a very specific group of people in our sample, and so those are kind of the weaknesses of that type of study. Whereas a correlational or field study, when you're out observing people and the environment, precision is very weak, right? It's hard to say anything about cause and effect. There's lots of potential confounds. But the generalizability to different situations and different people are very strong. Quasi-experimental, we've kind of put moderate all the way across, and then a population study, the strength there is generalizing to people. That's a true random sample. But these first two are kind of the ones we wanted to focus on. So knowing there's no perfect research method, a good researcher will know the advantages and disadvantages of a given methodology, which hopefully you've learned, and you'll maximize a method's advantages while minimizing its disadvantages. So if you decide you're going to do an experiment, well, you're going to do everything possible to make it a really internally valid, precise study with lots of control and all of the things that you need. And then if you're going to do a field study, then you're going to try to make it very externally valid. You're going to maximize those strengths. And then oftentimes people either construct a research program, if you're a researcher, a faculty member, a scientist, where you use multiple studies that compensate for the other's weaknesses. So again, if you're interested in studying how do cell phones affect people's attention, well, if that's your goal, then you may have some people in your lab doing experiments and some people in the lab doing field studies. So you're getting all the information in multiple ways. Or you might be an experimental researcher. That's kind of where I feel comfortable. I'm an experimental researcher. And so if I'm doing experimental cell phone research, maybe I just focus on that and I allow other labs to do the observational, or I collaborate with another lab who wants to do the observational field study part. And so in any case, you're getting information from both types of studies. And just to leave you with psychology research, not just for beginners, you've finished a research methods class, now's the time to keep going with this. You can take courses, more research courses, higher level research courses, testing and measurement courses. There's all sorts of research courses you can continue. I would highly recommend working in a research lab if it's possible. Volunteering, emailing faculty at your college or even other colleges or universities near you, looking at what research faculty is doing, sending an email that you'd like to volunteer and trying to get involved in research, and then certainly in service or in the community, you might be able as well to get involved with research. And so I would just suggest taking advantage of these opportunities. They'll help you understand much more about the research process, and you might even find you like it. I never thought I'd like research. I was going to be a clinical psychologist for sure. I wanted to help people. I wanted to have patients coming into my office. And then I started to do research. And the research classes didn't excite me that much, but when I actually started to volunteer, I realized I really liked it. And it totally changed my career path. So I would say volunteer and get experience as much as you can. Thank you very much. It's been great having you in class. Good luck, everybody.